journalism is advocacy. Now, I may have mentioned that I work at UT Austin. I'm in a school of journalism. And you might be wondering, well, Anita, are you saying you're in a school of advocacy? Why, yes. Yes, I am. So the way that I define solidarity is this, that solidarity is a commitment to social justice that translates into action. And there's lots packed into a deceptively short definition here. So let's take this a piece at a time. Translates into action. So action means doing something out in the world. Solidarity is not just a feeling that we hold inside. It's not just a private thought that we might, secretly hold but never express. And it's also not just a promise to do something. Now, promises can be where things start, but solidarity can't start and end with a promise in the absence of action to fulfill that promise. So keeping in mind, solidarity is a commitment to social justice that translates into action, right? If you're wondering, well, how does she define social justice? I am right there with you. So social justice means dignity for everyone. And dignity is your intrinsic worth. People don't need to qualify for dignity. They don't need to earn their dignity. You don't get dignity by virtue of getting a degree or getting a fancy title. You're born with it. Unfortunately, as we know, across many societies, including the US, not everyone's dignity is intrinsically respected by institutional arrangements, but your dignity itself is inherent. So solidarity reporting is a commitment to social justice that translates into the action of reporting on issues that affect marginalized communities. And this reporting starts with the perspectives of people who are affected. Now, note that I said perspectives. This is not just their emotional responses. What we find again and again across contexts is that in a lot of journalism, folks who experience marginalization are relegated to only having a chance to speak if they're expressing pain, if they're expressing sorrow, occasionally if they're expressing joy, but not if they're speaking from an analytical perspective or from a structural perspective about what's causing the emotional difficulties that they're having. With solidarity reporting, I always note this, that officials, elites, analysts, outsiders, we're not expelling them. They can come too. They can be included. They often are included, but they aren't prioritized over everyone else in solidarity reporting. So I'm sure many of you have read a story like this in recent days or weeks or months, where almost all of the story is quoting an elected representative in some jurisdiction. And at the very tail end, we have a quote from a person or a summary of a poll, right? Solidarity reporting would flip that to say, let's start with the folks who are affected. And we can also note, what are the folks in power doing? So as I said, solidarity reporting means starting with the people living it and representing them as the experts on the issues that affect their own lives. Because who knows what's affecting your life better than you? Arguably, no one, right? There's a distance attached otherwise. Or should we be thinking of a journalism outside of the formulaic dry confines of journalistic objectivity? So as I mentioned in the beginning, Gabe co-founded a media criticism venue called The Objective, which takes particular aim in its founding essay and mission at the heart of this question. Gabe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would love to talk about this. Lately I tend to rely on this framework that Wesley Lowery talks about, and I'm sure you may have read Wesley's op-ed in the New York Times about objectivity, but he might be pulling this from elsewhere. But I think he talks about objectivity of self versus objectivity of a method, and I think the problem that we often have is a lot of journalists proclaim that they have objectivity of self, right? That they themselves don't bring bias to their work, that they don't bring anything to their work that might be construed as biased. And I think what often ends up happening is, rather than, and I'm sure a lot of you know this again, rather than sort of shielding the reader from any sort of bias, what you end up with is those in power in the newsroom dictate what objectivities look like based on what makes them most comfortable. So that's often, like a cis white man dictating what objectivity is because he's more comfortable with that framework. Versus the method, I think objectivity is sort of a bad word now, in that it's hard to come back from its use in this way. I think it's really been damaged, but I think a method that aims to be fair and aims to really dig and research as much as possible before putting out a story, I think you could call that objectivity. But I also think that the word has been so destroyed by the use of an objectivity itself. So I mean, I think often now it's used as a cudgel, right, to punish reporters that don't look like or don't have the same experiences of those in power. And I think that's why we have the objective. That's what I've seen personally. That's what I've seen my friends go through and my colleagues. And so I think the advice that I'd give in general is, I think the most important thing to do as a journalist is to figure out, and constantly figure out, it's not just like a one-time thing, what your values are as a journalist and how you want to proceed as a journalist. I think a lot of folks can just rely on, the idea, oh, I'm objective, or I am a journalist that values, fair and accurate reporting. But I don't think those really speak to how you're going to be a journalist, the frameworks that you're going to use in your stories, what you're going to prioritize. Are you going to prioritize, and I'm sure you could do both, but are you going to prioritize AP style, or are you going to prioritize, solidarity journalism? What are the frameworks that you're going to bring to your reporting? I think is a really critical question. And for me personally, I think I'm at a point, I haven't been doing journalism that long, but I think at the point at which my values come into such conflict with the place that I'm working for, I would leave and rather do virtually any other thing and sort of freelance on the side, or figure out how I can do it on the side. And so that's what I've been thinking about.
I was reading earlier about how El Timpano started with a listening approach and a civically engaged strategy. Could you speak to that and what your thoughts were on not trying to adhere to kind of a traditional, neutral, objective Western 20th century model of what journalism should look like?
Going back to what you said earlier, Anita, journalism traditionally reflects and perpetuates the status quo. So it is when journalists are challenging that status quo that they are forced into the framing of being activists. And, by centering our journalism around marginalized communities, El Timpano is designed to upend that status quo. We're designed for equity. We're designed to inform and elevate the voices of marginalized communities. I think that produces much better journalism, but it does put us, kind of in the sort of framing of media activists I worked with elsewhere, who just because of the oppositional nature of their journalism are framed as activists.
Journalism is advocacy. Now, I may have mentioned that I work at UT Austin. I'm in a school of journalism, and you might be wondering, well, Anita, are you saying you're in a school of advocacy? Why, yes, I am.
Subscribe.